emergencies. These are not acceptable cuts, and I strongly oppose the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time.
Move to strike the last word,
from Indiana rise?
Chairman, appreciate the recognition and rise in strong opposition to the gentleman's amendment. The gentleman during his debate mentioned a penny of savings out of a significant sum of monies. I would point out, in conjunction with the chairman's remark, that the non-security programs in this bill for fiscal year 2013 are $188 million below current year level spending because the subcommittee and the full committee made discrete decisions account by account. Dependent upon nomenclature, and I don't want to get into a semantic argument, there may be some of these cuts that the gentleman proposes that touch what nominally would be considered defense accounts, but he also makes a point that he is going after non-defense discretionary spending. I assume, because he has left defense harmless, that he has never read an Inspector General's report relative to any defense program in the United States. And he mentioned a penny in his remarks, and I find it curious that he could not find 1 cent of savings out of $1 spent in a defense account. And for that reason, among many, am strongly opposed to the gentleman's amendment. If we are going to, in fact, make an investment in this country, and if we are, in fact, going to address our budgetary problems, everybody's got to be on the table with no exceptions. The gentleman's amendment, from my perspective, is a mistake, and I would yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from South Carolina.
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the gentleman from Indiana's words. I would point out to him, Mr. Chairman, that there are those of us on this side of the aisle that have encouraged us to look at defense spending as ways to cut not just a penny, but to find significant savings. I'd be curious to know, Mr. Chairman, how the gentleman from Indiana voted last year on my amendment to do exactly that, to freeze military spending at 2011 levels. But it's another discussion for another day. So with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from South Carolina. Those in favor of the amendment say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for taking the ayes and nays.
Question is, pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from South Carolina will be postponed. What purpose does the gentleman from Iowa rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. King of Iowa. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following. Section 519. None of the funds made available by this Act may be used to implement, administer, or enforce the requirements of Subchapter 4 of Chapter 31 of Title 40 United States Code, commonly referred to as the Davis-Bacon Act.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the Davis-Bacon Act amendment. And for the information, Mr. Chairman, it's this, that the Davis-Bacon Act was an act that was signed into law in or about 1932. It was generated in New York to lock the African Americans out of the construction trades in New York. It is the last remaining vestige of Jim Crow laws in America. It's a union protection law, and what it says is that any federal construction project with $2,000 or more involved in it must meet these federal prevailing wage standards. We know, and I've spent 28+ years as a founder and owner of a construction company and a number of years prior to that, so I'm over 30 years in the construction business, Mr. Chairman, and we know this amounts to a union-imposed wage scale and federally controlled wage prices. And what it does is it increases the cost of our construction projects. Now, our records over the years show that someplace between 8 and 35% is the increase with Davis-Bacon wage scale imposed as opposed to competition setting those wages. Some of the charts here that I'm looking at show between 9 and 37%. I just use the number 20% more. Our project costs us 20% more because of this federally imposed wage scale that's unnecessary, and it cuts out competition. You can make the decision then on whether we want to build 4 miles of road or 5, whether we want to build, Mr. Chairman, 4 bridges or 5, whether we're going to create and have these construction jobs, are they going to be 4 jobs or are they going to be 5? And in many cases, if we repeal the Davis-Bacon wage scale, you would have minorities. In fact, you'd have a majority of those that would fill those jobs would be minorities. It takes the Department of Labor 2.3 years just to issue a ruling on whatever the wages might be, and I've seen them vary 40 or 50 or 60% just across the road. That's how far off it is. So what this bill does is it prohibits any funds from being used to enforce or implement the Davis-Bacon wage scale, and it gets us a lot more bang for our buck. It gets us the quality that we've always had, and it puts America back into competition. That's what's built this country, and so I urge its adoption, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Iowa reserves the balance of his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise?
I'll rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
Gentleman's recognized.
Chairman, I appreciate the time and would note at the beginning of my remarks that Davis-Bacon is a very simple concept and is a very fair one. The law requires that workers on federally funded construction projects be paid no less than the wages paid in the community in which the work is being performed for similar work. Large federal projects can disrupt local markets if cheap imported labor is used. Davis-Bacon requirements ensure that local workers, citizens, Americans have a fair chance at bidding for federal contracts in their own individual communities. And additionally, prevailing wage protections are not the reason we have deficits, and doing away with them will not result in savings to the federal government. Davis-Bacon does not add to a project's total cost. A 2011 study of highway construction projects in the state of Colorado proved this point, as it found no statistical significance between the cost of highway projects in the state which were subject to Davis-Bacon and the cost of state highway projects which were not subject to Davis-Bacon. Davis-Bacon has not led to extravagant wages for affected workers. I would point out at this date, 2012, from 2000 and 2008, the real hourly wage rate for construction workers, carpenters, electricians, iron workers, plumbers, steel workers, declined, despite a small increase in the hourly wage rate. I would point out, when my mentor, Congressman Adam Benjamin Jr., walked into this room in 1977, the real hourly wage for 1 hour's worth of a human being's work in the United States of America, it could have been laying brick, it could be pushing papers in Congress, it could be waiting on tables at a diner in the middle of the night, was more for 1 hour's worth of a human being's labor in the United States of America than it was in 2010, and we're here tonight trying to slam down that wage. You want to save money on contracts, why don't we look at executive compensation for these construction firms? Why don't we look there for some savings as opposed to going to the lowest common denominators? Opponents claim that Davis-Bacon requirements are a union giveaway. However, more than 75%, 3/4 of Davis-Bacon wage determinations are not based solely on union wages. There are issues about the quality of work. Get it done efficiently, get it done right, do not do it a second time. That is crucial to these communities depending upon them. When local workers are hired, they are duly accountable to their employers and to the communities in which they reside. If the work is shoddy and therefore is delayed or needs to be redone, their families, their friends, their communities have to live with the consequences. This is a throwback, and I am strongly opposed to the gentleman's amendment and will reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves. What purpose does the gentleman from Iowa?
Mr. Chairman, I inquire how much time I have left.
3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I appreciate the gentleman's work in putting the statement together, but as someone who has lived this for 30 years, I don't accept this statement on its face, and I can tell you that my hands-on experience tells me something entirely different. The statement that was made that it says that the three-quarters of these decisions are not based solely on union scale. It might be based on union scale in a union contractor sitting down in the room to make an agreement with the Department of Labor. I know how these deals are made. It is union scale, and they sit there and decide we can drive up the costs of these public projects, and we can make sure that we can pay more in wages and benefits to anybody else and cut out the competition so that the entrepreneurs, the people that are founding businesses that are trying to get into this market are locked out of the market. Davis-Bacon locks people out of the market. It locks minorities out of the market. If you look around and you see that expression, people doing work that Americans won't do. Well, if you look around, the unions have been locking minorities out ever since 1932. That was the purpose of this bill. By the way, it was a couple of misguided Republicans that passed the Davis-Bacon Act and got that started. I'm embarrassed about that. But one day we will have to fix this because the Davis-Bacon Act is the last vestige of the Jim Crow laws in the United States of America, and it does drive up the costs, an average of 20%, somewhere between 9 and 37% for these costs. You cannot be either said that there's a reduction in quality when we put competition in. Competition increases the quality, it increases the efficiency, it brings about the skills in the workforce, and it allows contractors to bring people in at a scale where they can be trained. So we have more competition for the labor, we get better bang for our dollar, we build 4 bridges instead of 5, 4 miles of road instead of 5 under Davis-Bacon. We can do it the other way around and reverse it, and I would yield, or I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Indiana.
I would simply mention that if the gentleman from Iowa is suggesting that labor organizations in this country today are discriminating on a racial basis, he has not attended many union meetings lately.
Oh, yeah.
And I would be happy to yield 45 seconds to the I would be happy to yield the remainder of my time to the woman from Texas.
I thank the gentleman very much. If my good friend from Iowa was joining and trying to make sure that federally funded construction jobs went to companies that were based here in the United States, I'd be celebrating with him to avoid the incident that happened with the bridge in California, where it was built by a Chinese company with Chinese nationals who had come over to the United States. But in this instance, I would like to ask the gentleman where he finds this present-day discrimination. In fact, as he well knows, opportunities for minority contractors have come about because of members of this Congress who have fought for what we call not set-asides but MWBE opportunities. We have seen the increase of construction companies. We need more. But more importantly, unions have engaged in apprenticeship programs. Prevailing wages are nothing but giving a hard day's work and a decent paying wage. It is to construction what we were trying to do with paycheck fairness. And so I disagree with the gentleman that in this day and time we're not making extensive efforts to make sure that there are diverse populations working and being trained under the union label and umbrella, and that there are young men and women who are benefiting from these training programs. But more importantly, that MWBEs, and if the gentleman would want to work with me on ensuring that these small contractors can work in federal projects, he would have me align with him today. But not to deny us the Davis-Bacon and prevailing wages. I ask my colleagues to oppose the amendment in the name of fairness and in the name of the betterment of the working person. I yield back.
Gentleman from Iowa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to that, I would say again, I've worked in this trade for a lifetime. I've been in the room. I know how this works. This is union scale imposed through the Department of Labor. It is not prevailing wage. There's a study I have in front of me that shows that if we repeal Davis-Bacon, there would be approximately 25,000 more minorities working in the construction business. Some trades there are many, some trades there are few. It's not something that's balanced across the countryside. But what you don't have is competition coming into the marketplace. You do not have efficiency in your work. You don't get the bang for the buck because you've got a federally mandated wage scale. And it cuts down on the efficiency because you have people on the projects that are looking for the highest paid scale that's there, and so they will climb on the finished motor grader and drive up and down the road rather than the rough bulldozer to get the production work done. They won't pick up the shovel because it pays less than it does holding the grade stake. You cannot get willful efficiency out of people when you have the federal government deciding what they're going to pay. And additionally, we have some studies also that show that when they audited the reports, 100% of those wage reports were wrong, Mr. Chairman. So I'd urge its adoption.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Chairman,
Gentleman from Indiana.
move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
At this time, I would like to recognize my colleague from Massachusetts.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to refute the gentleman's last point especially. I worked for 18 years as an iron worker. I've worked not only in the Massachusetts area, but New York, New Mexico, Louisiana, worked at Indiana, worked a lot of the steel mills. I've worked a lot of jobs where Davis-Bacon has been in effect. What Davis-Bacon does, and the gentleman's amendment would provide that none of the funds made available through this bill will be available to administer the wage rate requirements of Chapter 4, Subchapter 30, Chapter 31 of Title 40, which is the Davis-Bacon Act. What Davis-Bacon was meant to do is to prevent the wages in any area of the country, and every area of the country, from being depressed by bringing in low-wage workers. This was the practice back before the prevailing wage, before Davis-Bacon was in effect. You'd have large construction projects, but you'd have unscrupulous contractors who would pay very low wages to their employees, and they would move into an area where the cost of living required those workers to get a decent wage. And what will happen now, if we repeal Davis-Bacon, which is a very, very bad idea, not only for the gentleman's district, but every state in the union, is we will get one group of very low-paid workers, and they will be like locusts. They will go into areas where, whether it be Houston, whether it be down in Texas or Louisiana or in the Northeast, we will have low-wage workers go in there and undercut the wages of the workers in those areas. This prevented that practice of undermining the wages of local workers. The Davis-Bacon wage is established by a study in your area, in the gentleman's area. Specifically, they look at the wages for the trades, construction trades. I was an iron worker. They look at it for plumbers, electrician. What is the area wage for that individual worker? Now, I'm sure we can find some workers over in Mexico that'll come in and work for less money. And that's supported by a lot of people in this body, unbelievably so. Davis-Bacon prevents that from happening. The contractor has to pay the wage for Houston, the wage for Tucson, the wage for New York, the wage for Boston. Those wages are different for each area because of the standard of living and the cost of living in those areas. This protects workers, whether they're union workers or non-union workers. And I've worked on Davis-Bacon jobs where there have been non-union working across from me. I worked at the Shell Oil Refinery down in Norco, Louisiana. Half the job was union, half the job was non-union, because that was the deal. That's how they got enough workers to cover that job. So this is not and I've worked 18 years, strapped on the work boots every single day for 18 years. I've been a foreman, I've been a general foreman. I've worked on Davis-Bacon jobs, I've worked on many, many jobs. I've seen how this works, and I know the history here and why this law was put into place. This is a good law. It prevents piracy. It prevents undermining the workers in every state in this union. If you strap on a pair of work boots, I don't care if you're union or non-union, this is a good bill for you. This protects you. They tried to repeal it after Katrina in that area where Katrina was affected in Mississippi and Louisiana. And the president suspended it for a short while. You know what he had to do? He had to reinstate it because they couldn't get enough workers to come in because the wages were so low they could not get workers in there. So President George Bush repealed his own executive order suspending Davis-Bacon. And when they lifted that, the workers came in and worked. Workers from Louisiana, workers from Mississippi took those jobs. This is another attack on the working people. This This is just blue-collar jobs. If we don't support apprenticeship programs and decent wages and a set of skills in our workers, shame on us, shame on us, shame on us. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time, and I thank the gentleman for his courtesy. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman for his remarks. And would simply say this is not, to Davis-Bacon, an attempt to increase wages. It is to protect those who labor in this country from having their wages undercut. I am adamantly opposed to the gentleman's amendment and yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Iowa. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from Iowa.
I request the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Iowa will be postponed. What purpose does the gentleman from Ohio rise?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Jordan of Ohio. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section: None of the funds made available by this Act for Title 17 Innovative Technology Loan Guarantee Program may be used by the Department of Energy to issue or administer new loan guarantees for renewable energy systems, electric power transmission systems, or leading-edge biofuel projects as defined in Section 1705 of the Energy Policy Act of 2005.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And let me just say, this complements the amendment that was done earlier by Ms. Blackburn from Tennessee. This is the No More Solyndras amendment. We're all familiar with that situation. And as the clerk read, this amendment would prohibit any new loan guarantees for renewable energy, electricity systems, and biofuels as defined in Section 1705 of Title 17. And as I said before, it complements what the House agreed to and passed earlier. Let me just quickly tell you about this program. This is a $15 billion program. 26 projects got your tax dollars. Of those 26 projects that got American tax money, 22 of those 26, 3/4 of those, 22 of those 26 were rated BB- junk status. In other words, no private capital will go there, but it was okay to put your tax dollars into these projects. And what have we got for this? Everyone knows the story of Solyndra, received $35 million, fired 1,000 workers and went bankrupt. But we also have Beacon Power, which received $45 million of your tax dollars, went bankrupt as well. First Solar got $3 billion in loan guarantees. It's now fired half of its workers. Its stock has plummeted. And Abound Solar, just to name four, Abound Solar, $400 million loan guarantee and has fired 180 workers. So this is real simple. Here's what's going on with this program. The 1705 program was funded by the stimulus project. That has now expired. But in this continuing resolution that was passed last year, in that bill there was language which allowed the 1703 program to continue to do what was previously done in 1705. And so my amendment says enough of that. We've had enough taxpayer dollars wasted. We don't need any more. We don't need the Department of Energy. Our committee that I get the privilege of sitting on, the Oversight Committee, has had several hearings on this. We don't need the Department of Energy handing out more of your money to companies with BB- ratings and lower, junk ratings and lower. We don't need that anymore. And this says enough is enough. We're in debt. This is at least one place we can start to save some taxpayer dollars. And I would reserve the balance of my time. Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. What purpose does the gentleman from Indiana?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
Appreciate the recognition. I rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment. The Title 17 loan program has had its share of publicized problems. But I do believe that the Department of Energy has implemented changes to the program that will strengthen the management of it going forward. And while it is impossible to ensure the success of a loan guarantee, these reforms, I believe, will significantly reduce the risk borne by the Department. This amendment is specifically targeted at renewable energy projects pending approval under the 1705 Innovative Loan Guarantee Program. Some of these projects are eligible to have their credit subsidy costs covered by the Department. Generally, given the current capital markets and project structure, it is difficult for renewable projects to raise sufficient revenue to use loan authority. Because we have several promising projects that remain in the pipeline, and the companies behind these applications have invested a significant amount of time and financial resources to advance them, I do not believe that this amendment is fruitful. The amendment would make these efforts multi-year for naught and further exacerbate the uncertain business environment facing innovative energy companies at this time. Therefore, would be opposed to the gentleman's amendment and would yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just respond. The gentleman talked about a couple of problems, I think the language he used referring to this program. It's hard to see how when you have companies going bankrupt with taxpayer money and 22 out of 26 of the projects that were funded were rated below investment grade credit quality. In other words, junk status. It's hard to see how you can say a couple of problems when that's the history of this program. At some point, we're going to have to cut some spending. You know, there's one of my favorite movies. Maybe some of you may have seen the movie 1776, and it's a musical, and it's when they draft the Declaration of Independence. And there's a great scene in there, great line, many of them, but one of the ones that I remember, where they're going through the declaration that Jefferson has just written, they're marking it up, they're editing it, and as they go through this, there's members of that Congress who say, well, we don't want to say this because that might really offend King George, and if we say this, Parliament may not like that, and what about deep-sea fishing rights? And they go through this whole thing, and finally John Adams stands up and says, it's a revolution, damn it, we're going to have to offend somebody. And at some point, we've got to say, we are so in debt, we're going to have to cut something. Why not focus on a program that completely doesn't work, a program we all know has failed? So if we can't even, if the other party can't even cut a program where 22 of the 26 projects are junk status, no one would give them money, they gave your taxpayer dollars to them, and they went bankrupt. If we can't even stop that program, how in the heck are we ever going to deal with a $16 trillion debt larger than our entire economy? So this is as simple as this is the low-hanging fruit here, guys. And this party over here won't even go there. Unbelievable. The program speaks for itself. It's a failure. We should end it. We should save taxpayer dollars and take that initial first step into bringing some sanity back to our fiscal situation. I would yield back the balance of my time and urge a yes vote on the amendment.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Ohio. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri rise?
I have an amendment.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Graves of Missouri.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Graves, and the member opposed each will control 5 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I rise today in support of my amendment, which modestly reduces funding for the Missouri River Recovery Program. Since 2006, the federal government has spent more than $468 million on the Missouri River Recovery Program. This program is primarily intended to improve the ecosystem for the piping plover, the least tern, and the pallid sturgeon within the Missouri River Basin. Projects funded through this program include shallow water habitat creation, land acquisition, and emergent sandbar habitat. It also supports unknown numbers of positions and departments within the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Fish and Wildlife Service. It generates thousands of pages of documents and pays for numerous conferences and conference calls. Many of my constituents along the Missouri River have been flooded for the last several years due to mismanagement and misplaced priorities of the federal government. Congress practically writes a blank check for the Missouri River Recovery Program while providing far less than sufficient funds for levee maintenance and repair. This is unacceptable. It's also important to note that many projects funded by the Missouri River Recovery Program increase the chance of flooding by weakening flood protection systems. Further, a recent independent review of major initiatives of the Missouri River Recovery Program concludes that the current mitigation strategy does not mitigate losses of the pallid sturgeon, the least tern, and the piping plover, or the degradation of their habitats. So Congress is essentially spending millions of dollars on projects that are unproven. And at the very least, these funds are diverted away from critically important and proven flood mitigation programs. My amendment won't prevent future floods, but it will show those located in the Missouri River Basin that Congress is serious about getting its priorities straight. What my amendment does is it simply doesn't gut the Missouri River Recovery Program. It's only a small reduction from the amount provided in the underlying bill. The underlying bill provides $71 million, and my amendment reduces that to $50 million, which is consistent with the levels it was funded in 2008. I believe conservation is important, but we should not overlook what it is we sometimes sacrifice to achieve conservation. In this case, it is the livelihood of businesses, farms, and families. I would urge my colleagues to support the amendment, and I'd reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. What purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise?
I'll move the strike to last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to express my opposition to the amendment offered by the gentleman from Missouri. I would certainly agree with him that we are not making sufficient investments in our infrastructure, but this amendment would do nothing to resolve that problem. But it would introduce a host of other detrimental impacts to the basin and will lead to a failure to comply with the requirements of the Endangered Species Act. The $90 million which was in the President's budget is the Corps' best assessment of the minimum required to maintain long-term biological opinion compliance. There is in the bill an $18.6 million cut already, which reduces the Corps' ability to maintain required progress on emergent sandbar habitat construction and shallow water habitat, Yellowstone intake, and real estate acquisition. While the gentleman indicates he does not want to gut the program, the fact is he would add another $21.4 million worth of cuts, essentially representing a 44% cut of the President's budget. If that's not gutting, it's certainly a significant hindrance. Given the extent and existing cuts, the Corps would need to consult with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on the potential for reduced progress on biological opinion compliance and on potential operational adjustments, opening the possibility of a jeopardy determination. Further, reducing the amount would have a significant and negative impact with regards to maintaining biological opinion compliance for the Missouri River, and the Corps may not be in a position to serve all 8 congressionally authorized purposes. And additionally, operational changes may have to be made to avoid impacts to lists of species that could result in split navigation season, impacts on hydropower production, and impacts on water supply and recreation. A split navigation season will further erode the ability of farmers and manufacturers to get their products to market or to the consumer. And given that the power produced by the Missouri River projects provide base power loads for the region, reduced production would further jeopardize peak power needs in the area. The impacts to water supply also potentially could be great. Many communities are already having difficulty with the intake infrastructure to local water supplies. Without the regulation of river flow provided by the projects, these communities will have a monumental task to extend the intakes for the low flow periods, increasing again the burden on already cash-strapped local governments. For these reasons, I would urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment, and I would yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I stated before, we're not gutting this program. We're just reducing the funding for it. And for that matter, too, I might add that even if we zeroed this program out, it would have absolutely no effect on water intake systems, on power generation systems, on navigation whatsoever. But the fact of the matter is, and I've seen it, this money is spent to dump sand in the river so that it can create more sandbars or try to recreate more sandbars. It's used to buy more land, which takes land out of production. And the fact of the matter is, we have trillions of dollars worth of deficits each year and trillions of dollars worth of debt. the last thing we need to be doing as a federal government is buying more land and dumping dirt in the Missouri River to create habitat. That's the bottom line. It's unacceptable, and this program needs to be reduced. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Missouri. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Will the gentleman specify the amendment?
The amendment is the modified Charleston method amendment.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Landry of Louisiana. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available in this act may be used within the borders of the state of Louisiana by the Mississippi Valley Division or the Southwestern Division of the Army Corps of Engineers or any district of the Corps within such divisions to implement or enforce the mitigation methodology referred to as the modified Charleston method.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Landry, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have constantly championed the need for Louisiana to protect its fragile coasts and wetlands. I've offered amendments and supported bills that all positively affect the creation of new wetlands and starts to turn the tide on coastal land loss in Louisiana. But the New Orleans District Corps of Engineers office is going to cripple our ability for Louisiana to protect itself from dangerous hurricanes by introducing a standardized method of wetlands mitigation. This standardized method is called the modified Charleston method. This method is driving up the state and local mitigation costs of hurricane protection in Louisiana by 300%. And I said only the state and local costs because the Corps has exempted itself from its own method on federal projects. This is why the American people are frustrated at the federal government. It creates a rule, enforces it on everybody else, but exempts itself. The Corps' new wetland rules are actually halting the creation of wetlands. As such, my amendment prevents the enforcement of the modified Charleston method within the state of Louisiana for 1 year, forcing the Corps to take a breath and develop a mitigation system that provides for our wetlands without stifling the need for hurricane protection measures and economic development. My amendment impacts only Louisiana. If your Corps district uses the MCM and it works for your constituents, great. Your Corps district can continue to do so. But the MCM does not work for Louisiana. In fact, the state of Louisiana, the Police Jury Association, our association of counties, the levee boards of Louisiana, Association of Levee Boards of Louisiana, Vermilion Parish, and countless local communities have all have severe concerns about the MCM. Moreover, the MCM does not acknowledge that some construction projects actually preserve wetlands. For example, a flood protection levee that protects homes also protects wetlands from saltwater intrusion and erosion. However, these benefits are not calculated. The Corps itself does not follow the MCM, and until it does, local parishes, communities, and builders should not be forced to follow it as well. And I urge the passage of this amendment and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. What purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise?
Rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
Gentleman's recognized.
I appreciate that. Do rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment. While I have some sympathy for the issue that the gentleman has raised, I believe that more consistency should be brought to the way we evaluate wetland impacts, not less, as this amendment would ensure. The Charleston method has been utilized for 2 decades in various Corps districts. The Charleston method is a quick, inexpensive, and consistent methodology. I think that's very important to note, a consistent methodology for use by the regulated public and the Corps. Gentlemen suggest that it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, I do not know why in 2006 and 2007 the New Orleans District worked with its federal and state partners to modify the Charleston method so that it better reflected the unique conditions found in southern Louisiana, resulting in the modified Charleston method. The use of the Charleston method is longstanding in many core districts. Many regulatory customers use the tool to assess their potential mitigation requirements for their impact site, as well as credits required at mitigation banks. This transparency in core mitigation requirements has helped the applicant prepare a complete application package and determine mitigation costs up front. Suspension of the use of the Charleston method in core districts would require that any pending permit application, Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, and pending mitigation banks would need to be re-evaluated using a different assessment tool methodology, or in the absence of such, use best professional judgment to determine appropriate mitigation requirements for impacts and for available credits in mitigation banks, obviously encompassing a great deal of delay. All approved mitigation banks with available credits that were determined by the Charleston method would be temporarily closed until a new methodology can be developed and the bank credits converted to the credit system of a new methodology. These banks were established utilizing the credit system of the Charleston method, and until a similar credit system can be determined for these projects, it would not be possible to correlate the new requirements with the old system. We would not have transparency. We would not have consistency. We would have delay, and for these reasons, I do oppose the gentleman's amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Louisiana.
Mr. Chairman, how much time do I have left?
2.5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, the only thing consistent about the method is that it doesn't work in Louisiana. In fact, the only thing that it increases is the amount of land that the mitigation banks can sell. We have parishes in Louisiana who understand that the federal government doesn't have any more money. The residents and citizens of those parishes have taxed themselves to protect themselves from storms. And yet, the formula that the Corps is using is driving the cost of these projects to a point where they can't build them anymore. But yet, some in this body will argue that after hurricanes come in, after hurricanes affect Louisiana's coast, they don't want to pour the money in to rebuild those communities. Those communities are trying to protect themselves at a time when the federal government has told them no as a source of funding. And yet, now, the federal government is going to change the rules. It just doesn't work in Louisiana. And for that, I urge my colleagues to help me pass this amendment. I also, Mr. Chairman, would like to I'd ask unanimous consent to enter into the record.
Is this covered? Huh? Gentleman from Louisiana.
I would like to, I would also, at the same time, I close action, unanimous consent to enter into the record 2 letters from different municipalities supporting.
The gentleman's statement is covered by general leave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Landry of Louisiana. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available under this Act may be used to carry out Section 801 of the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007, 42 U.S.C. 17281.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentleman from Louisiana and a member of Mr. Landry and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2007, Congress passed the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007. Section 801 of this act authorizes the Department of Energy to create a national media campaign to promote alternative green technologies and wean Americans off of fossil fuels. My amendment defunds this media campaign. Our government must get out of the business of picking winners and losers. The American public knows far better than any government bureaucrat what energy sources work best for them, their families, and their business. Instead, private green energy firms should use their own advertising campaign funds on behalf of the energy sources they sell. Why are government dollars needed? I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and to defund this taxpayer media campaign. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Question is on the amendment. Oh, does the gentleman of Louisiana? Does the gentleman yield back? The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Brooks, Alabama, right?
For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Brooks of Alabama. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available under this Act for the Advanced Research Projects Agency, Energy, may be used for unallowable costs related to advertising or promoting the sale of products or services in contravention of the requirements of Section 31.205-1 or for unallowable expenditures related to raising capital in contravention of the requirements of 31.205-27 of Title 48 of the Code of the Federal Regulations.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Brooks, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I offer an amendment to address a shortcoming in the manner in which ARPA-E, the Department of Energy's Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy, spends taxpayer dollars. In August 2011, the Department of Energy Inspector General released an audit report that disputed costs incurred by ARPA-E award recipients. For clarity, an ARPA-E award recipient is a private company or entity that seeks operational cost reimbursement from federal taxpayers. The Inspector General disputes that private company expenses for, quote, meetings with bankers to raise capital, end quote, and, quote, a fee to appear on a local television program, end quote, are reimbursable costs that federal taxpayers should pay for. The Inspector General report found that such spending violates Federal Acquisition Regulation Subpart 31.2. ARPA-E disputed the Inspector General's finding and argued that such costs are allowable under ARPA-E's statutory authority to fund technology transfer and outreach activities. In February 2011, ARPA-E finalized technology transfer and outreach guidance for awardees that explicitly encourages ARPA-E private company awardees to engage in and seek taxpayer reimbursement for these questionable expenditures. More specifically, the policy states that acceptable taxpayer reimbursement activities by private companies include, quote, marketing and other expenditures related to promoting an ARPA-E funded technology, quote, consulting and other expenditures related to developing ARPA-E funded technologies, building business, and identifying potential users, markets, and customers, e.g., business plan development, market research, and, quote, presentation and other expenditures relating to seeking additional funding from the private sector and government agencies. ARPA-E guidance suggests the inappropriate spending identified by the Inspector General may be significantly widespread. At a January 2012 hearing, the Science, Space, and Technology Committee's Subcommittee on Investigations and Oversight examined ARPA-E guidance and spending. One day prior to the hearing, ARPA-E delivered the committee an updated policy that omits mention of these questionable spending activities. Hence, ARPA-E's revision adds confusion, not clarity, to the spending question. In the absence of more explicit guidance consistent with Inspector General spending concerns, there is a significant risk to American taxpayers that ARPA-E private company awardees will incur costs that violate federal regulations, yet which ARPA-E reimburses out of taxpayer funds. On February 10, Subcommittee on Investigations and Oversight Chairman Paul Brown asked ARPA-E Director Majumdar to clarify in writing whether ARPA-E considers the activities mentioned in the original ARPA-E policy as allowable spending. Responses to these questions were due on February 24, 2012, but the Department of Energy refuses to provide a responses which are now well over 3 months past the deadline. This amendment does what ARPA-E should have already done, make it explicitly clear that the spending concerns identified by the Inspector General, using taxpayer funds to raise private capital and using tax dollars to market, advertise, and promote private company-funded technologies are not allowable. ARPA-E tax dollars should not go to private company advertising, marketing, and, quote, meetings with bankers to raise capital, end quote. Stated differently, in this era of deficits and accumulated debt that threaten America with insolvency and bankruptcy, American tax dollars should not be used to pay for the operational costs of private sector companies, particularly when the Inspector General has already determined they are improper. Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
Would the gentleman from Alabama yield?
Yes, sir. Gentleman yields.
I think we're prepared to accept your amendment.
Gentleman reserves or yields back?
And I yield back.
Gentleman from Alabama, do you reserve or
I
yield
reserve.
Back? Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Does the gentleman?
I yield back.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Alabama. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Schweikert of Arizona. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used to enforce Part 429 or 430 of Title 10 Code of Federal Regulations with respect to shower heads, as the term is defined in Section 430.2 of such title.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is one of those sort of occasions, I'm going to refer to this almost as the law of unintended consequences. About 6 months ago, I was visiting one of my favorite places in life, a Starbucks in Scottsdale, and a gentleman walks up to me, just bouncing off the walls, and apparently it wasn't from a bunch of espressos. He had just been given a $447,000 fine for his tiny little business that made custom shower heads, made specialty shower heads, because apparently the water restrictor ring inside was too easy to pry out. Now, I need to disclose something here in all honesty. I've actually changed the shower heads in my house. And guess what the first thing I've always done is I take a screwdriver and stick it in there and pull that little water restricting ring out of there, because I have this bad habit. I actually like to get wet when I shower. I know it's a novel concept, but it's something I like to do. But think of this. The Department of Energy is out there enforcing, and here's the standards they live by. If it takes more or less than 8 pounds of pressure to remove the water restrictor after they take apart the shower head, they come and fine you. But the creepy part of this story is they demanded a list of everyone who had purchased one of these shower heads. So now the Department of Energy is putting together the database of the people who bought shower heads that the water restricting O-ring inside is too easy to remove. Have we lost our minds? You know, I'm not thrilled coming to the floor and doing a limitation amendment on something like this, but this is the type of thing the American people are absolutely livid about. And this actually affects our daily lives. And with that, Madam Chairwoman, I reserve.
The gentleman from Arizona reserves. The gentleman from Indiana, for what purpose, gentleman from Indiana?
Rise to claim time in opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Appreciate the recognition and do rise to oppose the gentleman's amendment. The standards the gentleman is very exercised about were contained in the EPA Act of 1992 and have been in effect for more than a decade. And they, in fact, do save energy and they do save water. A number of states are starting to adopt tighter standards on these products, including the state of Georgia, because they do save energy. There is no part of the country, including mine, that borders the Great Lakes, the largest body of fresh water on the planet, that does not have water supply concerns. In California, there has been a tremendous public investment to encourage and incentivize homeowners to replace their utilities with models that require less water. I really do not know why we are discussing this issue again. We have talked about it in the 90s, we have talked about it in the last decades, and here we are this evening talking about it again. Manufacturers have been complying with this provision for, again, a decade. The question is, why are we talking about it today? I am aware of an enforcement action recently, but against plumbing manufacturers who have put multiple compliant shower heads onto one fixture, obviously trying to sidestep the law when you have 3 efficient shower heads attached to one. With water shortages across the country, with an energy crisis in most of the mountain western states, I would ask my colleagues to oppose the gentleman's amendment and would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Madam Chairwoman, may I inquire to my time?
The gentleman from Arizona has 3 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. This is actually an interesting debate from a economic standpoint. Being from the desert, where we actually really care about our water supply, we learn something. And I'm one of those people. I live in a house with rock landscaping and low water this, low water landscaping. But I do like to get wet in my shower, as we've already stated, is if you want to deal with water usage, basic economics says you do it through the pricing mechanism, not through trying to manage my life with a bunch of laws. Madam Chairwoman, I stand in front of you and I hope this amendment passes because in many ways I think this is a great example of what drives the American voters, the American people, mad, that we try to micromanage every aspect of their lives and we turn huge numbers of them functionally into criminals. Because I would love to do an honest survey through this body of how many people have done any remodeling or put up a new shower head and who have not monkeyed with that flow restrictor it's inside that shower head. You know, and ultimately, I appreciate that in 1992 this somehow passed through this body, and maybe it was meant to help. Maybe it was meant with all sorts of good purposes, but this is not the rational methodology to promote that type of water conservation. And then when you turn the Department of Energy into a police force who actually now sets standards that, so tell me if I can exceed 8 pounds of force, then all of a sudden it's perfectly legal. But if it's under 8 pounds of force in removing the water restrictor, then I get a $447,000 fine, as my constituent did here. And with that, Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
I appreciate the recognition. I do not live in a desert. My congressional district, in fact, borders the largest body of fresh water on the planet Earth, as I mentioned in my earlier remarks. But I find water very precious myself and try to explain to my constituents every day we should not take it for granted. But I find the debates that we have engaged in here very interesting tonight. A bit earlier today, we had an amendment to suppress the wage rates in this country. We have about 13 million people who don't work today. But the gentleman suggests the way that we solve our water crisis in this country is pricing. His solution is let's increase the price of water. Let's increase the price of water for those 13 million people who aren't working. Let's increase the price of water. Let's use pricing for water to conserve it for those people who may not be making a living wage because people want to destroy Davis-Bacon in this country. Maybe we ought to think about the people who are just getting by, just scrubbing to get the money to pay their water bills. Pricing means something to them. And in this case, if regulations that have been in place for more than a decade will help those people of least means pay their water bills, I say that's a good thing and a very sound reason to oppose the gentleman's amendment, and I would yield back my time.
The gentleman from Indiana yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Wyoming seek recognition?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mrs. Lemus of Wyoming. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following: Section